hello, very beautiful community. A lot of positive sounds are being emitted about the proximity of negotiations to a culminating success. But that doesn't reflect reality. Mr. Trump's attempt to bring the Russia-Ukrainian war to a close is very far off from being anywhere near reality. When you hear statements like we're 90% there on many of the issues that matter, you can take that a little bit as though you and I had a quarrel about who this house belongs to, and we decided that we had to divide 10 things. Who owns this mouse? Who owns these headphones? Who owns these spectacles? Who owns this duster? Who owns this spare microphone? And finally, who owns the house? And so we've settled almost all the issues except the issue of who owns the house. That's roughly the ludicrousness of these remarks about how we're 90% of the way there. But where is Putin in all of this? Let's talk about this. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022, Putin felt a great degree of ecstasy and exhilaration about what he was doing. And the reason this was liberatory for him is that Putin was going to preside over something dramatic that would hopefully succeed, and that it would solve a lot of his immediate problems. Some of them it did solve. One of the things that Putin was troubled by is that he was outsourcing power to the court around him. The court around him engaged in quarrels between themselves about what to do with that power, and he arbitrated these quarrels. So it was already a very considerable diffusion of presidential powers, an illegitimate and probably illegal diffusion of presidential powers that he was engaged in. But he increasingly felt that he was more a referee than a decider in many of these proceedings. And so the full-scale invasion was in part about reconcentration of power in his hands. But what happened is that power got reconcentrated in his hands, but it became more fragile than it was before. He had more power in his hands, but it was more fragile in how it was held. And months later, Putin had moments not of ecstasy, but of, I would say, not terror, but extremely tense, stressful concentration, whereby he felt he needed to do everything right to keep himself and his regime going. He felt that during the Prigozhin mutiny. A lot of what he feels now is a kind of disinterested fatigue. He's still fairly stressed, but he feels, in my assessment, a kind of disinterested fatigue, because while his war is not going badly, it's not going particularly well either. He feels exhausted and fatigued, I feel, around the economic challenges. So let's say a little bit about that Russia faces. And he feels fatigued about the manpower challenges that Russia faces. What then is his cumulative approach to Russia heading toward economic deterioration and economic crisis? I think that that's the first feeling he feels. Not panic, not overwhelm, but exhaustion and fatigue. This is a difficult situation that needs to be managed. We can't entirely see how we're going to manage it, but we're going to find solutions. The second thing I feel he feels about it is faith and trust in flexibility. When he did Crimea in 2014, people around him came and said, this is going to be very expensive. It's not going to be in our interest necessarily to do this, economically speaking. Putin said, maybe so, but you take care that it's as least damaging as possible. He's much more concerned now, of course, than he was in 2014, but the psychology is the same. The economy is something that is adaptable enough to be managed. And the third thing he feels about it is relativity. Yes, we are in economic strife, but let's focus on our direct opponent, Ukraine, and let's focus on our indirect opponent, the West. It's not an economic crisis, but it's a political crisis, right? Trump's in power in America, Farage is heading for power in the UK. Similar stories are going to happen in major continental European countries and so on. So we've got negative trends, they've got negative trends. That's roughly how he feels about it. What about his feeling about negotiations, what Ukraine is asking for, what the Putin regime is asking for? How does he see all of this? I think it's very important that you recognize two elements to current Kremlin demands, to current Putin anticipation of what he is open to and not open to negotiating on. Putin's territorial demands of Ukraine are, if you like, borderless. There is no particular bit of territory that Putin needs, followed by a particular bit of territory that he doesn't need. And relatedly, Putin's territorial demands of Ukraine, as is true of his other demands, are functional. Right? It's about putting pressure on Ukraine's political system so that something happens to it, so that it becomes ungovernable. So it's not true that Putin has a clear eye set on a particular bit of territory. Putin's territorial requirements are flexible, and their aspiration is to trigger deleterious political transformation in Ukraine. The aspiration of the territorial demands is not territorial. Putin also has a general faith in something bad happening in Ukraine eventually. And this is a kind of asymmetric equivalent of Ukraine's not faith but hope that something bad happens on the Russian territory. Serious people in the Ukrainian regime, of course, don't expect Russia to fall apart economically. But they think that there's a chance of some kind of a black swan event because these events are, as unpredictable as they might be, at least more plausible in the context of a strange kind of autocratic, mafia-like regime. Even when things are going well for it, it could conceivably just fall apart over a 6 to 18 month period. And Ukrainians don't think that's likely, but they think there's a shot of that happening. Whereas what Putin feels about Ukraine is that something really bad happening politically in Ukraine is kind of inevitable, but it's not clear when that'll happen. It's a matter of when, not if, but the when might not come soon. But there is this expectation that the longer things are drawn out, the more likely it is that this upcoming event will finally happen. Putin's conception of his own position is that he doesn't need to concede any more than he is currently prepared to concede. Insofar as he has remained with the maximalist aspirations with which he began the full-scale invasion, which is political control over Ukraine and disintegration of democracy in the West. He's still committed to those. He is now, however, open to conceding something that he certainly wouldn't have been open to conceding before the full-scale invasion. And that's that he is open to a deal whereby Ukraine remains sovereign. He would only be open to that deal if the deal left sovereign Ukraine very vulnerable and perhaps on course for some kind of toxic crisis that would make it available for Russian influence. But he's open to that, the way he wasn't before. He would have said, give me complete territorial control, complete political control over Ukraine. Don't need territorial control, except just as a way of getting political control. If we can get political control by other means, that's better. Indeed, if Putin hadn't gained an inch of territory since 2022 of Ukraine, but got political control, that would have been absolutely delightful for him. So he feels he's already made a very big transitional accommodation, namely that he is now prepared to agree to a hope that Ukraine collapses politically as opposed to a guarantee of it. But he won't be open to a deal which he feels leaves Ukraine in a position to sustain itself economically and politically over a decade or two. He wants Ukraine's prospect for that to be very, very weak, and only then will he agree to a deal. Could this change? This could change if something dramatic is done that isn't going to be done to undermine Putin's military capacity. And so therefore, we're not just far from a deal, but we're in a position where the transcendence of the factors that are in the way of a deal looks very, very difficult, if not impossible. Lots of love and talk very soon.